Good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. I just first want to say thank you again to our witnesses here today who took time to come to Washington to testify in front of this committee. This is an issue that's vitally important, not only to my home state of Iowa, but to farming communities across the country. I greatly, greatly appreciate you guys taking the time and really look forward to everything we're going to hear today and all of your expertise as well. So thank you again. Having grown up in Northeast Iowa, I know how important agriculture is to our way of life in Iowa, and that farmers are quite literally the backbone of our economy. And, in Iowa, agriculture contributes to over $9 billion annually to our state GDP and accounts for most of our top exports. In my congressional district, nearly 14,000 people are farmers or work in agribusiness, while countless others, like our manufacturers and small business owners, rely on a strong agricultural economy, like our UAW workers who make those John Deere tractors in my district. I'm very excited about our hearing today on ways we can support new and beginning farmers. See, I grew up in Sherrill, a little bit north of Dubuque, where I represented in the State House. It's a town with more cows than people, which I'm still very proud to say. My parents still live back there. My friends grew up on their family's farms. In fact, when I'd spend the night at their house, it was a thing. It wasn't even negotiated. You got up in the morning and you did chores. And I still know how to make a mean bottle of milk replacer to go feed the calves. But again, it was a way of life and still is that I'm so proud to have grown up around and been a part of. And it's something that we have to make sure that we are protecting in Iowa, not just for our economic security, but also for who we are and our values. And, I also think of my sister and her husband, who are corn and soybean farmers. They've got 500 acres and a 2-year-old, and now I think he's 4 weeks old, or he will be on Saturday, a little guy at home. And I've heard firsthand from them and folks across the district just how tough things can be and are right now because of an ongoing trade war that's been happening for over a year and a half. And so there's a lot going on in the agricultural economy, and we need to be making sure we're doing everything we can here in Congress to hear from the folks on the ground living it day to day, and making sure that Iowans in my generation and the generations after mine are able to live their dreams and take over family farms and invest in new ones to start their own dreams. Again, our way of life continues to be at risk given what we've seen in the past 20 years. Iowa's lost actually over 10,000 farms, many of them small and medium-sized farms. It isn't just Iowa, though. This is happening across the country. The farming community is aging. The average age of the American farmer is around 58 years old. And in Iowa, farmers over the age of 75 have increased by 28% since 2012. To ensure the continued success of American agriculture, we must facilitate the transfer of skills, knowledge, and land between this generation and the next one. The problem continues, again, to be bigger than that. Again, while farming has never been easy, you don't go into it because it's easy, but the increasing cost of production, low commodity prices, again, exasperated by this ongoing trade war, coupled with unpredictable weather patterns such as flooding we've experienced this spring in Iowa, have made it difficult for farmers like my friends that I grew up with in Sherrill, and folks all across my district. And as I'm sure we'll hear from our witnesses today, aspiring and beginning farmers are facing significant challenges, and some of them are much different than some of our parents' generations. There are things we can do, though, and we should do, to step up with these new and beginning farmers to help success. We should explore new ways to help farmers access the capital they need to not only invest in the land and equipment, but offset some production costs when they're first starting out. Another great way for young farmers to get started is with infrastructure and livestock facilities. I'm happy to be working on legislation that would help beginning farmers access capital for ag infrastructure. We know that new and beginning farmers, like many Americans, including myself, are also saddled on top of all this with student loan debt. We should examine how that impacts their choices and opportunities when it comes to starting a career in agriculture. We should also help these farmers access emerging markets both at home and abroad. We also need a smart trade policy that helps, not hurts, American agriculture. As weather becomes obviously increasingly unpredictable, like we saw with the floods in the spring, farmers also need strong infrastructure from the federal government when it comes to national disaster strikes. The future of a rural economy truly depends on the next generation. Just like our teachers, police, officers, and small business owners, farmers are part of the fabric of our rural communities. They make places like my hometown somewhere where people can work hard, raise a family, and have a good life. And I'm so fortunate to work with my ranking member, Dr. Joyce of Pennsylvania, on these issues day in and day out. And I'm happy Mr. Hagedorn is stepping in today for a few seconds, which I know obviously are equally important to your district as well. I'm glad that we share this priority for supporting our farmers and our rural communities, and I look forward to continuing our bipartisan work on this subcommittee. I want to, again, just thank the witnesses for being here for what I hope will be a very productive discussion. I'd now like to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Hagedorn, for his opening statement.
Madam Chair, I appreciate that. Thanks for holding this hearing. Wonderful to be with you today. I say as someone who represents Southern Minnesota in the 1st District, also serve on the Ag Committee, it's a critical hearing. These are issues we really want to get to the bottom of and talk about how you're helping out with our generational farmers in the future, not just the ones that we've had in the past, but building up farms and operations as we move forward. I'd say that, in the farm country for the last 5-6 years, it's been tough. It hasn't been just since the trade disputes, or if you want to say the resetting of our trade agreements. It's been tough. Regulations have been driving up costs. Obamacare has been a big cost for our farmers, and things of like energy. Farmers depend on low-cost energy, and when you drive up the cost needlessly, it makes it tough. So sustaining agriculture, our rural way of life, critically important. What you're going to talk about today and what you're doing is a big part of that, and we appreciate all the witnesses for being here. Communities in my district and across the country, they rely on 2.2 million farms in the United States, and of these, 88% are small. They're not all big operators out there. Only 20% are operated by new and beginning farmers, however, and ranchers. So that's what we're talking about today, and why we need to explore these areas and see how we can continue along that path. One U.S. farm will feed about 165 people annually. And when you think about the wonder of agriculture, agribusinesses we have today, people know the next day when they walk into that grocery store, those shelves are going to be stocked with an array of choices at affordable prices. It's really one of the great wonders of all the world as to how this works each and every day. It isn't like that in every country. There's one down in South America where the people have lost 25 pounds on average because there's no food in the grocery stores. And I tell folks that we have to keep our farmers moving forward, because you can have a pocket full of $100 bills or EBT cards or the things that we do to make sure that people have an opportunity to feed their families. But if there's no food on the shelves, we're in a lot of trouble. So we appreciate our farmers and what you're doing in that regard. With a projected global population of 9.7 billion by the year 2050, the world's farmers will need to grow to approximately 70% more food in order to, in order to feed the world. And our farmers do feed much of the world. We export a lot, and we need to export more, and I think that's what we're all working toward. In the state of Pennsylvania, which Dr. Joyce represents, over 6,100 farms have been lost in the last 5 years, and we want to make sure we keep those generational farms in business, because when they sell out to bigger operators, and bigger operators are not bad folks, it means fewer people holding the land, working the land, living in our small communities, going to our schools, shopping on Main Street at our small businesses, and we need to make sure that we don't put undue pressure on our small rural communities. We want them to grow and thrive. And so with that, today's witnesses will discuss their experiences in the farm industry and give us some insight into what programs work best for new and beginning farmers and ranchers. I look forward to your testimony. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hagedorn. The gentleman yields back. And if subcommittee members have an opening statement prepared, we'd ask that they be submitted for the record. I would now just like to take a minute to explain the timing rules. Each witness gets 5 minutes to testify, and the members get 5 minutes for questioning. There's a lighting system right there in front of you to help you out. The green light will be on when you begin, and then the yellow light comes on when you have 1 minute remaining. The red light comes on when you're out of time, and we ask that you stay within the time frame the best of your ability. I would now like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Matthew Kiesling, the farm manager at Burris Organic Family Farm in Deer Brook, Wisconsin. Mr. Kiesling served in the United States Army for 24 years as an enlisted soldier and an officer, including 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. He retired as a major in 2017. Mr. Kiesling earned a Bachelor's of Science degree from Kansas State University and an MPA from Webster University. He is currently an apprentice with the federally recognized Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship and is also the Veterans Liaison for the program, where he works to aid his fellow veterans entering agriculture. Mr. Kiesling is active in his local 4-H and is looking forward to purchasing the farm that he has apprenticed for the past 2 years. Welcome, Mr. Kiesling. Our next witness is Mr. Jason Grimm, a third-generation Iowa farmer from my congressional district. He started his farm enterprise in 2011, where he raises dry beans, poultry, and produce on his farm near Williamsburg, Iowa. Mr. Grimm earned degrees in landscape architecture and environmental studies from Iowa State University. In addition to farming, Mr. Grimm is the deputy director at Iowa Valley Resource Conservation and Development in Amana, one of the most beautiful towns, actually, in the 1st District. He's also a leader in Iowa's local and regional food systems. Mr. Grimm has more than a decade of experience in community food systems. He cultivates local and statewide networks and coordinates farm-to-business supply chains. He's led more than 20 workshops, sharing his knowledge with over 250 beginning farmers. Mr. Grimm has developed a statewide Iowa farm-to-school toolkit and acts as a value chain coordinator, connecting producers to each other, to viable markets and institutions, and cultivates relationships within the food system. Thank you for all that you do, and welcome, Mr. Grimm. Thank you for being here. Our third witness is Miss Mary Lilia Mullins. Miss Mullins is the farm manager at Lighthearted Ranch in Longmont, Colorado. Miss Mullins works on rangeland management, animal husbandry, and herd management. In addition to working as a farm manager, she's also an engineer working on public safety and road maintenance. Welcome, Ms. Mullen. We're very, very happy to have you here. I now yield to Ranking Member Mr. Hagedorn to introduce our final witness today.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Our final witness is Rod Hebring, President and CEO of Compeer Financial, a proud member of the Farm Credit System. Mr. Hebring is responsible for leading the Compeer Financial team in providing loans, leases, risk management, and other financial services to farmers in rural communities, including Blue Earth, Minnesota, my hometown, where you have an office. Under Mr. Hebring's leadership, Compeer has provided a spotlight for young farmers through the Groundbreaker of the Year award, recognizing standout small operation farmers. And furthermore, through a company commitment to rural America, his team has assisted in administering millions of dollars in grants to upgrade county fair facilities, emergency response equipment, scholarships to high school seniors, and to support local 4-H and FFA groups. And they were just in our office this week. I can tell you how important that is. Mr. Hebring holds a bachelor's degree in agricultural business administration from the University of Minnesota and a graduate degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison Graduate School of Banking. Mr. Hebring recently testified before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture. And thank you for coming back to D.C., Mr. Hebring. We're looking forward to hearing about your clients' stories and looking forward to your testimony. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hagedorn. Mr. Kiesling, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and good morning. A little bit about the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship. Thank you for the introduction. DGA is in 12 states with 180 approved master dairy grazers. 45 of those are paired with apprentices. We have 30 journey grazers, or graduates of the program, and over 100 apprentice candidates that are looking for the right opportunity to enter the dairy industry. Personally, on the farm, we are members of a cooperative, Organic Valley, and we are set to purchase the farm within the next year. The farm has been with Organic Valley since 2005, and the value added from this co-op has been one key reason for the farm's success and survival. I would like to thank the members for holding such a hearing and gathering information to help shape programs and legislation for the next generation of farmers. There are three things I would like to bring to the members' attention that I have had experience with as I've worked towards being a business owner and dairyman. And those are federal programs that I have attempted to use and the outcomes of those, with a focus on the Farm Service Agency within the USDA, education and training offered for dairy and agriculture versus what is actually needed, and finally, the concept and importance of community-based agriculture and mentorship for anyone entering the agriculture industry. In 2012, as I became eligible for retirement from the Army, I visited with the FSA in Emporia, Kansas to discuss financing in order to start a dairy from scratch. Over the previous 4 years, we had purchased the land and some necessary equipment, discussed necessary permits with local and county agencies, selected our herd, freestall and parlor design, and secured a feed source and milk processor. I worked with 3 local dairymen that were close to retirement through this process and have spent numerous hours on their farms learning the finer points of being a dairyman. I worked with the Small Business Administration and SCORE to develop and finalize my business plan, even though the mentor was not in agriculture. That day in Emporia, I was told that even though I had taken these steps, the business plan was solid, I did not have enough education in agriculture. I took this information, stayed in the Army instead of retiring, and started to look for ways to meet the education requirements that lenders were asking. In 2017, I finally retired and I had entered into the dairy grazing apprenticeship program and relocated to Wisconsin. We're better to learn to dairy than the dairy state itself. Early on, I visited with the FSA office in Wausau, Wisconsin to ensure that I was on the right path to buy an existing dairy farm. Again, I was met with resistance and informed that even after graduation from the DGA, I would not have met the requirement for experience. I would need another 3 years of managing or operating a dairy to qualify to be a beginning farmer loan. With all the areas and or categories that I had thought I had qualifications in, veteran status, being a beginning farmer, years of management experience in the military, and education from both the university and through an apprenticeship program, nothing translated to agriculture and dairy, so I would have to go find a job and work in a management position for 3 years before I could be seen as an acceptable risk to the FSA. Existing federal support programs brief well, but they are far from where I believe they were intended to be. There is a need to provide clearer guidance to federal program offices if this is truly the case. I would like to go back to 2012 now and share some of the searching that I did to try to meet the education requirements. I already had education in management. I was still on active duty, so I was trying to provide knowledge and gain knowledge while I met my military obligation. Even though there were several online programs, there were none that matched the experience piece. Dairy grazing apprenticeship was the only real option to gain both while not postponing a desire to own and operate for another 3 to 5 years. Along this path, I learned that mentorship is critical when entering a new industry. The Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program has been there since we started DGA, and maybe their focus could be on supporting the trainer as well as the trainee. SBA and SCORE were not able to support agricultural businesses. They were more into tech, retail, and consulting, and one size does not fit all. DGA has since found mentors and enlisted them to be prepared to train the next generation of farmer. With the new dairy concept through DGA, we have the potential to mimic this nationwide. As you are all aware, there are always needs for a beginning dairy farmer. There are access to capital, access to a market, and a network of community of dairy farms to learn and grow. In closing, I would ask that you all invest in a model that has proven to work, apprenticeships. Protect the grants that are currently available and allocate them to better serve nonprofits. Universities study, but apprenticeships do. Allow incentives for trainers and mentors as they grow for the next generation of farmers. Limit vertical integration of the dairy industry and regulate to protect the ag of the middle, to ensure that the next generation at least has an opportunity to enter this fine example of being a true entrepreneur. Thank you for your time and listening to my testimony today. Go Packers.
Go Pack, go. Absolutely. Yes. I grew up in, Cheryl, close to Dubuque, obviously, where you were either a Packers fan or a Bears fan. And I luckily grew up a Packers fan. So I'm going to take off half the people in my district by just saying that. But forgive me. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Kiesling. And Mr. Grimm, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, committee and staff. Thank you for this opportunity to share my experiences as a young farmer. Congressman Finkenauer, thank you for inviting me specifically to represent the 1st District as well. My name's Jason Grimm. I'm 33 years old. I'm a beginning farmer from Williamsburg, Iowa. I began farming 8 years ago and started with a specialty crop of black beans, very unique to Iowa, on my family's cow and calf operation. In addition to farming, I am co-founder and treasurer for the Eastern Iowa Young Farmers Coalition and a member of the National Young Farmers Coalition, Practical Farmers of Iowa, and Iowa Farm Bureau. However, I also work full-time off the farm as deputy director of Iowa Valley RC&D, a nonprofit located in Amana, where I've worked for 10 years. I started the organization's Regional Food Initiative in 2009 to address systematic change in Iowa's food system. My family, Grimm Family Farm, or my farm, Grimm Family Farm, is a small farm business that I started in 2011 with the help of my wife and family. My 2 young boys, Emmett, age 2, and Elliot, age 6, are already incorporated into the farm. Elliot loves to feed the chickens, and Emmett loves to go to tractor rides with his grandpa. Soon they'll be big enough to open gates to our farm fields while riding along on the tractor like I did during harvest. I started my farm business because I love the challenge of agriculture, enjoy being outdoors, and I have an entrepreneurial spirit. I also believe that farming can strengthen community, and farming is a tradition in my family. Continuing that tradition, I began renting a few acres of my family's land in 2011 to raise pastured poultry and grow dry beans, potatoes, and produce. When I first began farming, I sold primarily to family and friends. Today, I sell these crops throughout eastern Iowa to grocery stores, restaurants, caterers, school districts, and colleges. Now in my 8th growing season, like so many other young farmers across the country, I found myself limited by the instability of growing a business on leased land without an opportunity to build infrastructure earn equity through ownership. Federal programs like the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, the Farm Service Agency's microloan program, and the Farm to School grant program have helped me grow my business and access new markets. My customer list grows every year, and my need to increase production of my crops has led me to pursue purchasing some of my family's land or relocating my family to purchase land nearby. Owning rather than renting would enable me to build a facility to properly store and operate the equipment needed to clean and bag my dry beans. Such a facility could help me expand my production capacity to grow my business to support a career full-time on the farm. In 2013, I approached my grandparents about buying a tract of their land, but hit a roadblock. My grandparents, who are now in their mid-80s, are hesitant to sell the land because of financial advice warning them about high capital gains taxes. As a 3rd generation, I did not expect access to be so difficult. I thought I just needed a viable business plan, and everyone would be happy to have the land stay in our family. I thought I had the best-case scenario. In the last couple of years, discouraged with the second set of circumstances that my grandparents face, I have turned my attention to other land that may be nearby my home. I have approached landowners, but many of these landowners do not want to go through a multi-year process of transitioning land to a beginning farmer. When landowners want to sell to a beginning farmer, the cost of land is out of reach for my farm business, especially considering my monthly student loan debt. I believe that had been able to purchase part of my family's farm 6 years ago or any year since, my business would be a lot different today. I would have grown my line of dry beans to include 3 varieties. I could be contracting other farmers to grow beans for me. Today, I'm marketing my beans from Iowa City to Omaha, but with access to more land, I would probably be selling to the larger Midwest market and possibly even have 2 value-added products. Recently, I connected with one landowner about an hour away from my family. She has been operating her farm for 25 years. We have discussed transitioning the land, but selling outright would be challenging for her as well because of the taxes incurred through the sale. Also, my wife and I are unsure we want to relocate to another community. The school district our oldest son attends is the same one that I grew up in, and many of our family and friends attend that school as well. Plus, our church community is located in our hometown. I urge you to explore creative solutions to this land transition challenge. Examples include state tax provisions for land sold or rented to beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers, and also these or a tax break related to capital gains taxes incurred on farmland sold to beginning farmers and socially disadvantaged producers. These tax incentives would help level the field for us when we're purchasing land and give us more negotiating power as well. America needs more young farmers. I hope that farming can be an option for young people now and into the future. Thank you again for this opportunity and the opportunity to represent Iowa beginning farmers. I look forward to your questions and continuing the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm, and I thought you were going to end up saying, "Go Cyclones." ISU, their mascot is the Cyclones. But that's really contentious in the area that you live in, though. I was going to say, so close to Iowa City and the Hawkeyes. But thank you again, Mr. Grimm. I appreciate you being here. And I'd now like to recognize Ms. Mullins for 5 minutes. Thank you.
First, thank you, Chairwoman and Ranking Member, the members and other members of the subcommittee for this invitation to testify here today. Thank you for holding this hearing and for the opportunity to provide a perspective on the challenges and opportunities that we face in the next generation of farmers and ranchers. This work is extremely critical, and I really, really appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Marie Lilia Mullins. I'm a first-generation farmer in Longmont, Colorado. In exchange for room and board, I manage a 42-acre farm where I raise goats, chickens, honeybees, and grow vegetables. In addition to farming, I also work full-time off-farm, and I volunteer for a local nonprofit, Mad Agriculture, who works with farmers to restore soil health through farm planning and policy work. I am also a member of our local chapter, the Flatirons Young Farmers Coalition, and the national chapter, or National Young Farmers Coalition, where I participate in local policy work and regular education events. I have a great desire to make farming my life's work, which started with my passion for reconnecting urban communities to food while I was in college. I have a bachelor's degree in chemical environmental engineering from the University of Toledo. When I decided that farming was the most meaningful way that I could use my technical degree, I began seeking farm labor opportunities to gain more hands-on experience in agriculture. I quickly realized farming was not as romantic as it seemed. In many cases, farm internships in my area included a $400 a month stipend with no health insurance. I simply could not afford to learn how to farm while covering my living expenses and paying down my student debt. The cost of farmland and the availability of financing is well out of reach for anyone with student loans. Farming full-time was no longer a possibility for me, which led me to working full-time for a manufacturing company and managing the ranch. While this is a wonderful learning opportunity, managing the ranch full-time while working full-time really takes its toll. The sad truth is, I am not unique in working and farming to make ends meet. Over 60% of U.S. farmers have off-farm incomes. Unfortunately, due to student debt, I am unable to farm full-time. I need my current day job to pay my $500 a month student loan payment, along with other living expenses. My current workload managing a farm and working full-time is just not sustainable long-term. I spend many evenings and weekends working on the farm and keeping up with things on top of my full-time job. I'm faced with a few options. I'm currently facing burnout from working and farming full-time. I could farm full-time and forego any health insurance and retirement planning while incurring more interest on my loans. I could incur massive debt on top of my student loans, purchasing my own farm to attempt to defy all odds and making a living farming for myself while paying off my debt. Or I could quit farming altogether, just keep my day job, and none of these are viable options that lead to a successful career and long-term career in agriculture. Without any financial cushion or inheritance, the chances of me quitting my engineering job to pursue farming full-time at this point are pretty slim, and that really deeply saddens me. While the barriers to entry into agricultural career are high for next farmers and the new generation, one way that you all can support beginning farmers is through student loan forgiveness. My student loan debt is currently my largest obstacle in my pursuit of farming. This is the reality for many talented, passionate young individuals across the country, and there is not a shortage of young people that want to farm in this country. Without congressional support, our aging rural farm community is at risk of losing these gifted young farmers to other industries. We need to ensure that we have a strong population of young and beginning farmers in this country. They feed our communities and are stewards of our land. Currently, the average age of a farmer in Colorado and nationally is approaching 60, and only 6% of farmers are under 35. Those numbers are pretty scary to me. Farmers provide a valuable public service. Agriculture meets one of our most basic needs. They produce food for our families and our communities. They also steward our land, nearly 1 billion acres under agricultural cultivation in the U.S., which is half of the land in the United States, provide valuable ecosystem services, and protect natural resources. Lastly, we support rural communities and economies, providing jobs and income that have helped these communities weather population decline and the Great Recession. As the nation faces a crisis of attrition within the agricultural sector, it is essential that we help the new generation of growers succeed. I urge you, and I hope that you can do everything in your power to support the next generation of farmers by addressing student loan debt and land access for farmers such as myself. Thank you again so much for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mullins. I appreciate you being here and for your insight. And I now would like to introduce, or not introduce, but recognize Mr. Hebrink for 5 minutes.
Well, good morning, Chairman Finkenauer and members of the committee. My name is Rod Hebrink, and I'm the President and CEO of Compeer Financial. Compeer is a proud member of the Farm Credit System. We provide financing, risk management, and financial services to farmers and rural communities in Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Compeer is a cooperative owned by our customers and focused on championing the hopes and dreams of rural America. Our mission connects us with thousands of farmers who are passionate about agriculture and determined to pursue their dreams of exploring niche agriculture, launching entrepreneurial businesses, or entering the industry for the first time. We appreciate the committee's focus on young, beginning, and small farmers. These farmers are an important part of our mission in support of agriculture and rural communities. 72% of Compeer's loans are with young, beginning, and small farmers, who we call YBS farmers. Like all other Farm Credit System lenders, Compeer offers special programs to meet the needs of YBS farmers, from educational programs to special underwriting criteria to discounted rates. We work hard to find creative ways to get farmers started and to ultimately succeed. For example, Living Greens Farm in Faribault, Minnesota grows fresh greens and herbs aeroponically in a controlled environment. Aeroponics is revolutionary. There are no pesticides and no soil, just a nourishing mist spritzed on the roots of plants. Dana Anderson launched Living Greens Farm in 2012 after working out of his garage for 3 years. Dana struggled to find capital because he was looking for cash flow-based financing versus asset-backed lending. SBA and USDA programs were not viable options due to the cost of accessing the programs and his limited collateral. Fortunately, Compeer helped him to find equity capital to move forward. But unfortunately, equity capital is much more expensive. Today, Living Greens Farms employs 30 people marketing their produce to local retailers. They're profitable and completed their first expansion last October. Matthew Wyronen is a beginning farmer who expanded his business despite challenges obtaining financing. The 37-year-old logger and beef farmer lives in McGregor, Minnesota with his wife and 2-year-old son. They have a 100-acre farm with 40 head of cattle and rent another 200 acres for hay. Matt is an entrepreneurial-minded 4th-generation farmer and 3rd-generation logger. Logging is Matt's main source of revenue. 2 years ago, Matt switched from conventional tree-length logging to cut-to-length logging. Logging is a capital-intensive investment or industry, and Matt needed to make a new $250,000 capital investment. He would have been a perfect candidate for the 7A SBA program, benefiting from the lower interest rate that comes with the guarantee. However, the high fees offset the program's intended benefits. Compeer provided a traditional loan without a guarantee from either SBA or USDA. An interest rate reduction was not available for Matt at a critical stage of growing his business. Reginaldo Haslett Mariquin operates a 40-acre experimental research and training farm in Northfield, Minnesota. Last year, Reginaldo and 3 local farmers started Regeneration Farms with $100,000 of their own equity and an operating loan from Compeer. Regeneration Farms initially applied for a loan through SBA, but they didn't qualify because they were considered a startup with no financial history and insufficient collateral. In 2018, Regeneration Farms contracted with producers to raise chickens that they sell under their Tree Range brand. 1 year later, they are expanding because of an opportunity to produce, freeze, and ship chickens to the West Coast. To meet this demand, they worked with Compeer for another operating loan. Well, this works for now. Their business is challenged with limited options for affordable financing to expand and to create the brand awareness that they need to grow. I've shared some of the obstacles with the SBA loan guarantee programs. I hope these stories shed light on the challenges young and beginning farmers face. We also have customers who benefited greatly from the SBA programs. And we're asking you to address some of the barriers: high fees, difficult requirements, and time-consuming processes. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hebrink. I really appreciate, again, you being here as well. And now we are going to start the question portion of this. And with that, I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Grimm, I'd just like to start with you. You grew up in a farm family. You've had the incredible opportunity to work closely with your father and your grandfather. With their land and equipment, you were able to start a very successful operation that you run today. You've now been a farmer for 8 years and become a leader in our state when it comes to local and regional food systems. Thank you, by the way. However, you mentioned that you weren't always interested in farming, and what advice do you have for young people from farm families and communities like yours who actually maybe are not considering a career in farming right now, especially given everything that we're seeing with the ongoing trade war and the weather patterns, you name it? Do you have any advice for those that are either on the fence or not sure if they want to go into it?
Well, farming, just like other industries, as a business. So I took farming to me as an entrepreneurial opportunity and looked at what are opportunities to grow and produce new crops and things for in Iowa. So I feel like the biggest opportunity for younger generations to come back to their family farms is through diversification, whether that's making value-added products on a dairy farm, to raising new crops like small grains for wheat and flour products. My advice to other farmers that are unsure if they want to come back to their family farm is to spend time to understand other types of agriculture than what we have in Iowa, and find a niche for your family farm so you can diversify and add new revenue streams for your farm family's business.
Thank you. And I know both Mr. Grimm and Ms. Mullins, you guys both mentioned student loan debt. And as someone who also has student loan debt, and I grew up, in a state where I'm first generation college graduate, there's a lot of folks actually in the first district who fall under that. And it wasn't always easy, and that's fine. But at the same time, I've been watching sort of what's been happening across our country, especially in Iowa or in places with lower populations where we keep continuing to lose populations, not keep the next generation, and have been starting to have discussions about how do we address some of that, and whether that's when we're looking at student loan debt and helping folks with that, how do we incentivize folks to move to areas that need population, or in areas that we need more folks, practicing in certain areas like farming. Would you be able to talk, Mr. Grimm, just how important something like that would be to you in particular, or to the friends that to get them to either stay in Iowa or move back home? And then I'd like to hear Ms. Mullins' take on it as well.
Well, I've paid off almost 30,000 of my student loans. Still have more than 10 to go.
Yep.
But a smaller payment each month or no payment at all would allow me to invest in land and a mortgage or more equipment, capital loans as well. It would also just, I think, give an opportunity for students to want to go into agriculture or to go into actual production agriculture, not work in an agribusiness place where the salaries and stuff are much higher than on the farm. Sadly, we as the farmers usually take the price and don't set the price. If I would have really taken the career path that I thought I was going to do after high school, I would have been earning twice the income that I am today. But I wanted to stay in Iowa, and I wanted to be close to family.
I hear that. I know a lot of folks feel the same way in the first district, and we've got to do more to bring more folks back home. Ms. Mullins, would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, sure. I'll just add too, I'm from rural Michigan, so
Yep.
a lot of a lot of the same stuff going on
get
there.
it.
Yeah, I think that, the biggest challenge that we face with student loans, me personally, I'm a first generation farmer. I don't come from a family of farmers that I could learn from generations and generations. So I'm in learning phase, and to try to learn to farm and have farm internships and apprenticeships that pay little to nothing and try to get into farming with my student loan debt is literally impossible without like my loans going on deferment or so just having incentives and education, I think, is what's really important to me, and just supporting those programs. Having loan forgiveness so that I could actually pursue learning farming before I were to purchase my own farm, which is what I'd really like to do, would be really helpful.
Well, thank you, Ms. Mullins and Mr. Grimm, and thank you all again for being here. And with that, my time has expired, so I'd like to recognize Mr. Hagedorn for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I acknowledge our ranking member, Mr. Chavez, here today. Steve, do you need to okay? Okay.
He snuck in on me.
Very good, yeah. Great to have you, Steve. And thank you for your testimony. Really appreciate it. Mr. Kiesling, appreciate your service to the country, what you've done for our country. I'm sorry that right now the bureaucracy doesn't quite understand some common sense in these areas. I think if you look back after World War II, Korean War, many of our soldiers came back, and they were the ones that became the farmers that are the generational farmers today with their families. And so I sure hope we can do what we have to do in order to make sure folks like you can get into the business, and we can support you any way possible. So again, thank you. Mr. Hebrink, I've toured that facility in Faribault, the Living Green Farms. Quite fascinating. What made you get involved in that, and what are some of the benefits long-term for the country of that type of farming? Just off the top of your head, I'm just curious.
Well, Compeer and other members of the Farm Credit System, we support agriculture of all types, and whether it's young beginning farmers and entering into entrepreneurial niches, and Living Greens Farms is a good example of that. Both a young producer, but also a producer with a new approach to agriculture. And we're seeing a lot of investment in urban agriculture, in locally grown agriculture, and Living Green Farms meets both of those criteria. And it's a new approach to agriculture, one that's sustainable and one that I think many of consumers are interested in seeing thrive.
Yeah, you're talking, you save on the transportation expense. You have freshness, quality that lasts a little bit longer in the local stores. So I think that's wonderful. One of the things that I think your group at Compeer and some of the others in the farm credit industry probably don't get enough credit for is that you're out there making loans and helping the communities with projects that are very critical, not just it could be healthcare related projects. It could be things like you said with the county fairs and all that. But you look at these other areas with the broadband and the infrastructure that we need in order to make sure that we have quality living for folks, and we want to have people in the rural areas. Do you have some other examples of those types of projects that you've been working on?
Well, yes, and thank you for the question, because we do see a strong connection between the health of agriculture and the health of rural communities. And so each of the other witnesses today have talked about their roles in coming back to the farm and building their local communities. But you have to have a community that offers other options and interest to attract people to come back to the community. And so we've been providing financing for things like critical access care facilities, rural hospitals, nursing homes that help provide the necessary services for all of the rural communities, whether it's farmers directly involved in agriculture or other citizens of those rural communities. And you mentioned broadband, which is one of those areas that's really lagging in rural communities and is one of those core utilities like electricity was in the 30s and 40s that needs to be built out in rural communities to continue to attract businesses. And the Farm Credit System has some authorities in building local infrastructure, in telecommunications, and water and sewer systems, and we look forward to those public-private partnerships. And Compeer has worked closely with the USDA programs and public-private partnerships, working with community banks to invest in the healthcare facilities. And those are some of the examples that the Farm Credit System can bring capital from outside rural communities and reinvest in rural communities.
I'm glad to hear that you're working so cooperatively with the community banks and others in in these rural areas, and it sounds like a win-win-win-win-win. That sounds good for our rural folks. You know, I had the luxury of growing up on a family farm in southern Minnesota. My father and grandfather, great-grandfather, all southern Minnesota farmers. We had hogs and grain, and you know, it's a wonderful experience. It's not for everybody, but those people that, especially when they grow up on the farms, we want them to continue along. But the people in the cities that have that dream and others do everything possible in order to give them an opportunity to go out there and be part of this system of agriculture. It's high risk. It's high capital. It's not always high reward. It's hard work, and I wish you well, and I hope you're able to get in the industry. I appreciate all you're doing to help our farmers and our rural communities. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hagedorn. And with that, I'd like to yield to Rep. Jason Crow, Chairman of the Subcommittee on Innovation and Workforce Development. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of you for being here. Mr. Hebrank, I appreciate your reference to Berry Patch Farms earlier in my district. My kids have actually been on numerous field trips out there, and it's a wonderful place. Ms. Mullins, thank you for representing the 40,000 farmers of Colorado and for sticking with it, because it's a very noble pursuit, and I hope you continue to stick with it. I wanted to begin with Mr. Kiesling. I'm a fellow veteran, and I'm particularly interested in the intersection of veterans issues in small business and agriculture. And as my colleague, Mr. Hagedorn, pointed out, there's a long history in America of our veterans going into agriculture and farming, and I appreciate you continuing that tradition. And I'd like to know what more we can do to help integrate the efforts of the VA and some of the benefits that you might have received through the VA with the SBA. Because I know oftentimes things get siloed in this town in Washington, and the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And if there are opportunities to better integrate the veterans benefits that you may have availed yourself of with some SBA or USDA resources, and what more we can do to make that more efficient for you.
Thank you. That could be a very difficult question, so I'll keep it simple and state that most veterans coming back will have some sort of educational benefit, and through SBA and SCORE, there are educational opportunities that they won't be able to use those benefits to attain. So similarly to dairy grazing apprenticeship, we're considered on-the-job training. So as I go through this program, it doesn't allow to pay for the tuition. My GI Bill can't cover the tuition for the related instruction, as well as the housing stipend that I received decreased every 6 months that I was in the program. So everything that I had as a veteran to maximize would be to go to a regular university, go to a job. It did not bring me to agriculture at all, and it didn't bring me into being a business owner at all, because any of those educational opportunities that are offered were not covered through my educational benefits. So that would be the biggest thing that I think I hope you leave here with, is that GI Bill needs to be applicable to anything that gets a veteran starting a business and joining the agriculture industry.
As a follow-up to that, and this would be a question for the other panelists today here as well, in the work I've done in the veteran space after leaving the service before becoming a member of Congress, we found that working in greenhouses, working in agriculture, working outdoors actually has a tremendous benefit in addressing PTS and other ailments with our veterans. And there are a number of kind of nonprofits that focus on that. And I also know that workforce development, finding qualified workers, is a real challenge in agriculture. So thinking about solving two problems at once, are there opportunities, tax incentives or otherwise, that would help you all connect with veterans that are interested in getting involved, working for you, with you in the industry?
Well, you're absolutely right, Congressman, that labor is a critical issue for agriculture. And there are shortages of labor to support lots of different types of agricultural production. And so, yes, if there are training programs for veterans and tax incentives for producers who would hire veterans to help bring them back into the labor pool for rural communities, I think that would be advantageous to our farmers.
Mr. Grimm, is that something that
I was just
your farm would help?
I was just going to comment. I think it would be important to look at programs. I think the Young Farmers Coalition in Colorado helped pass legislation that actually helps pay the trainer for their time to train. In this case, the veteran it's coming back to agriculture, because it takes a lot of time for us out of our farm business to also train the next generation. So, any way to support those farmers that are the trainers in that case, to help them train the new farmers.
That's a good idea. Ms. Mullins, do you have any thoughts on that?
Just something quick to add in support of that. We have a veterans group that works locally that is trained by other folks and is a contract group of veterans that travels frequently to different farms in our area that we've worked really closely with. So I know that there's programs that are there and that they're really beneficial, and other farms, like the farms in my area, are using them. So good thing to continue supporting.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you for all your testimony today. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Crow. And now I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Chabot for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hebrink, I'll begin with you if I can. We've already discussed a little bit about aeroponics. I had an opportunity to tour a facility in Cincinnati a year and a half ago, something like that, and was very impressed with it. And could you kind of explain the difference between aeroponics and aquaponics and hydroponics, and maybe some of the pros and cons of those, and also just some of the challenges that in aeroponics they have nowadays, like perhaps the high energy costs that you have to be concerned about. There are ways around that, but and if there are any tax advantages that somebody in that industry might have, and are they temporary or not? Just anything in those areas that you might like to discuss.
Congressman, I don't pretend to be an expert in the production of aeroponics.
You're
or
the closest
hydroponics.
thing we've got here today.
Yes.
So we're
But my understanding of the difference is, as we mentioned, in the aeroponics, the roots are actually suspended in air, and they're misted or sprayed with the nutrients, as opposed to aquaponics, where they're actually immersed in liquid. But I think the challenge along the way is whenever we venture into a new dimension of agriculture, which might be viewed experimental at some point in time, and certainly Mr. Anderson, as he began to put together his business plan, there weren't like operations in the area for us to draw on to compare and to know whether his was going to be a successful venture. So he was going into a new type of agriculture and had to market his produce in a unique manner, and that's one of the challenges for small businesses beginning, regardless of the type of venture, is to not only put together that business plan, but then to convince a lender and someone else to have confidence in the plan that they put together and that they'll ultimately be able to succeed. And fortunately, he has been very successful in his venture.
Thank you very much. And I'll open this up to any of the members of the panel that might like to comment about it. Could you discuss perhaps access to land, the challenges that there are there, kind of the cost of it, and how does one get started, and is it necessary to be in a family where there's a history of this and that sort of thing? So anybody who'd like to take that on would be. Yes, ma'am.
I'll just add or comment on that. Not coming from a family farm and having land to inherit, it's very challenging for me to even, look at financing options with student loan debt in addition. But just the opportunities that are there to transition land from farmers, like you mentioned, that are being disincentivized through taxes not to even sell to family members or outside of their family, is something that can really be looked at. So I guess that's my only comment.
Thank you. Yes,
I would add to that even I've been in the same community where we are planning to live for going on 3 years now. A lot of agricultural land isn't even advertised, and that is advertised is advertised as a business, and it's going to be a whole operation, and it's going to be well into 7 figures. And that's no one at this panel is ready. Well, three of us at this panel aren't ready to do that. But so that land that is advertised is recreational, is hunting, is wherever they can get the most value out of that land. And rarely do they see that as going to someone that's trying to pursue a career in agriculture, even if it currently stands as agricultural land. I see a lot of farms being sliced up 40 acres at a time to support a retirement portion for that farmer, or to supplement them as they are trying to transition and pay those capital gains taxes that were mentioned earlier.
Thank you. Yeah, and related to the capital gains taxes, et cetera, that you just mentioned, would any of you want to touch on or have any experience or background or knowledge relative to our current federal estate tax laws and how it can be challenging for passing a farm from one generation to another? And those tend to be one of the areas where the existing tax code really ought to be reformed to encourage it going from generation to generation rather than having to sell it off to pay the taxes. So, yes.
It's my understanding that the estate tax that is there disincentivizes those farmers from selling their land before they pass on. And so it's meant to, they are encouraged to keep it in this state so they don't have to pay the taxes. One way around that is to have a capital gains tax exemption for land that is being passed on to young and beginning farmers, which the National Young Farmers Coalition has a proposal for. So something like that could help incentivize rather than decentivize farmers that are, older and don't have anybody that they're wanting to pass their land on to, or are not going to because of, tax reasons.
Thank you. My time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Shabbat. I'd now like to recognize Representative Angie Craig from Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hebrink, thank you again for being here today on behalf of Farm Credit. I'm excited to have yet another Minnesotan in Washington testifying before one of our committees and sharing your story, especially as it relates to farm economy and young and beginning and small farmers. You mentioned in your testimony a number of YBS stories around farm country in Minnesota, including Regeneration Farms, which has operations in Northfield and Faribault, the Hmong American Farmers Association, with farms in my district that grow and sell food directly to area restaurants. In the case of Regeneration Farms, they initially applied for a loan through the SBA, but didn't qualify because the business was considered a startup with no financial history and insufficient collateral. So Compeer stepped in to help them get the business running. Can you give us a little more detail about that financing experience with Regeneration and both in the Hmong Farmers Association, how you think those examples can guide this committee to make those SBA loans more accessible?
Many pure production agricultural loans are more FSA-oriented as opposed to SBA-oriented. And so when you get in the case of Regeneration Farms, it's that processing aspect of their business that qualifies them for the SBA loans. And so I mentioned that they're having difficulty continuing to access the total amount of capital that they would like to continue to grow their business, because we're operating within conventional underwriting standards as opposed to what we would expect to be more relaxed underwriting standards through an SBA-type program. And you mentioned the Hmong American farmers, and Compeer supports the Hmong American farmers in the Twin City metropolitan area. We have Latino farm associations, Asian farm associations, and they become a critical part. It's a micro-loan program that we help to get those farmers started. We have grants to help train them in their business activities, to help with their business planning and tax preparation. And through those types of programs and in conjunction with the USDA, we've helped those communities of immigrant farmers become a mainstay in the farmers markets in the metropolitan area.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I assume access to more capital would just mean business growth for these entrepreneurs, correct? More marketing?
Yes. That's oftentimes one of their greatest struggles. They can get access to a certain level of capital based on the equity or the cash flow that they have, but they need additional sources of capital to continue to grow their businesses. And I think that's been the testimony this morning from the other witnesses supports that exact challenge.
Thank you so much. I want to turn to Mr. Kiesling at this point. Mr. Kiesling, you may know that my district actually ranks in the top 50 dairy-producing congressional districts in the nation, but it's a really tough time right now for dairy farmers. Despite these market forces, why are you choosing to take this leap right now, and what sets your business apart? How could your practices and financing structures benefit other struggling dairy farmers?
Well, thank you for your contribution to the dairy industry. I would go back to the chairwoman's opening remarks in that is both not just economics, but the social structure of the family farm. I'm kind of putting my military retirement funding as my off-the-farm income up to bat to fund this farm and provide it for the next generation. My daughter's behind me, so hopefully she'll be there with my children. And what sets ours apart is that the family that I am purchasing this farm from did not fall victim to get big or get out in the 80s and into the 90s. Their operating loans were kept low, their families were kept large, and their ability to do manual labor did not disappear. So I think if you have the drive and you want to work hard and you're willing to do that, you will be successful. If you find the right mentorship and you find the right program, as I did, you will be able to take over a farm and you will be able to carry it into the next generation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your contribution and to all of you. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Craig. And with that, I'm going to do just another round of questions for anybody up here who wants to ask them, just given the smaller group here today. So with that, I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Hebrink, as you know, we're experiencing right now a downturn in the agricultural economy. I've seen it firsthand in my district. We've been all over, whether it's, the small town of Manly, where we've had listening sessions with farmers in regards to, the attacks on, ethanol with refinery waivers that have hurt our corn growers, whether it's seeing that biodiesel tax credit expire over 18 months ago now or more, that should have been passed last Congress, which I'm very hopeful we can get through this Congress to help our soybean producers. Or whether it's this ongoing trade war that we've seen now, the retaliatory effects for over a year and a half. I just saw actually this morning before I came in, there was a notice that there's an ethanol plant over in western Iowa that is shuttering its doors because of the ongoing trade war with China. And I'm concerned every single day. I know we're hearing from folks dipping into 401ks. We had a woman actually testify in front of this subcommittee earlier this year saying she's telling her 3 sons not to go into farming. These are, not unique stories. And, on top of all of this, we're seeing folks file for bankruptcy. I know right now, Iowa, our farmers are holding more debt than farmers even in California. We just surpassed them this year, which is not something we, want to do. And obviously, farm bankruptcies across, many farming regions are at the highest point in over a decade. In some places in 2018, farm bankruptcies actually doubled from the previous year. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the Family Farmer Relief Act. This bill raises Chapter 12 operating debt cap to $10 million, allowing more family farmers to seek relief under the bill. It's bipartisan, bicameral, both support and from our senators actually in Iowa as well, and something we need to be dealing with. And with the net farm income down 50% since 2013, and obviously, like I said, debt at the highest level since the 1980s farm crisis, family farms and the future of many rural communities are in jeopardy. You mentioned in your testimony how some young farmers have encountered issues when trying to access, on top of all of this, financing programs through the Small Business Administration and USDA. how do you think we can improve these programs and increase flexibilities to make sure that they are helping our new and beginning farmers navigate these new and very trying economic times?
Well, thank you for the question. And as I mentioned, some of the challenges with the SBA programs has been the fees. The fees can be very substantial. I think they're over 3% for loans of $150,000 and up, and that's not a very large loan in many small businesses. And so those loans are intended to help support small businesses, but those kind of fee levels really offset the benefits of the guarantees. We also understand that the SBA programs are very time-consuming, and what we can do to streamline those programs and relax some of those standards to meet the financial realities of a beginning business would be very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight. I appreciate that. And Mr. Grimm, I'll just end with you too. Just if there's anything else you want to make sure that Washington hears and that this committee hears, because these stories that I've heard from Iowa, I know you're hearing from your friends back home as well. If you know, and again, just getting the need to get this trade war with China figured out and move on. Is there anything you'd like to say to us and to the administration while you're here in Washington?
Help us take the risk out of farming. That's primarily what the tariffs are doing right now. It's hard for us to make decisions on how to run our farms when we don't know the real future of agriculture, and those tariffs are they make it hardest to make decisions. So, and the uncertainty for our communities.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Grimm. I appreciate it again for you taking the time to come all the way out here. I know you guys took time away from your farms and your operations to be here, and I, again, just can't thank you enough. And with that, I'll recognize Mr. Hagedorn for a second time as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just give a little bit different perspective. I mean, in the farm country, the farmers who I've spoken with, it's been tough for 5 and 6 years. This hasn't been just since we tried to reset these trade deals, for instance. And, you know, in the last administration, I'm not saying, you know, agriculture goes up and down. It's farming, we get that. But some of those regulations that they were looking to put on our farmers were going to make it pretty tough. And I think some of the things that have been done in the last couple of years by, frankly, the president and some of the folks in my party, getting rid of that waters of the United States. If we didn't do that, we'd have farmers every day talking about how onerous that is and how it's driving up their costs. Obamacare has been a tough deal. You know, we have farmers out in our district. Their premiums are through the roof, but the deductibles are so high, the insurance is worthless. And you start taking $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 out of a farmer's income year in and year out, 4 and 5 years, for nothing because they hope never to have to use it. That's a tough deal on the bottom line. And you know, the tax reform bill, I think that helped allow a lot of farmers to expense their items in current years. And I haven't talked to any farmers yet that want that repealed. They think that was a good thing. And energy prices, you know, there's some policies that I think that have been changed that were anti-U.S. energy, driving up the costs. And for farming and agribusinesses, that's critical. 40% of the cost of producing a bushel of corn is energy. So when the price goes up, guess what? The farmer is going to be a little less productive, a little less efficient. It puts a squeeze to them. But on trade, I agree with you. Let's expand trade. Let's make sure that we pass the United States-Mexico Free Trade Agreement. Because when we do that, it's not just going to help farmers, agribusinesses, machinery, mining, everybody, right? It's going to create jobs, but it's going to give us that momentum we need to look at those other countries that we're dealing with, like Japan and China and United Kingdom and others, and say we can have better agreements. We can pass these things, and we can build momentum for those deals. And the bottom line, we want to drop down those barriers for farmers. We want to expand our markets because our agribusinesses and farmers are the best in the world. They can compete with anyone, but they need a fair deal. And those folks in China have been cheating us for a long time in a number of areas, dumping steel, they're dumping quartz in our district, they've been hurting agriculture, and some of it's, it's not all tariffs, but I hope we can get a deal, I hope we can expand it forward, I hope we can work together on that. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Hagedorn. Appreciate you all being here today. Again, obviously, there's a lot on your mind here today that are coming to testify. There's a lot on the minds of our farmers and folks all across the district in my hometown who are worried every day right now about their future. And I have to tell you, last night I was able to smile. I keep up with a lot of folks back home, friends, family, neighbors by Facebook. It's great to see the pictures that they're posting, and one that really made me happy. There's a young girl that lives next door to where I grew up. That's where their family farm is. They actually live on her grandparents' family farm, and her dad works at John Deere. Her mom works for the school district as a teacher. Like my mom was, my dad is actually a union pipe fitter welder, and my mom worked for the school district in Dubuque. And her name happens to be Abby as well. And so I love keeping up with little Abby. And yesterday I saw she won, it was her first big competition with 4-H showing cattle, and she won the novice showmanship award. And, I thought of her as I was going into this meeting as well, and just how much we just have to put differences aside and put our districts first, put the things that we are hearing in our district front and center when it comes to the future of both our ag economy and then rural areas in this country in general. Oftentimes they have been ignored, and the fact, again, that you guys took the time to make sure that you were heard loud and clear, it means the world to us. As we've heard, obviously, new farmers and ranchers face some very significant challenges, but there are opportunities for the next generation to be part of the solutions to revitalize our rural communities and to make a life for their families and to provide a service to our country. As older farmers leave, we know we need younger ones to take their place, maybe even little Abby one day. And we applaud each of you for doing your part to ensure that the next cohort of agriculture business can continue to produce the food, goods, and fuel that our country relies on. We look forward to seeing how the USDA sets up the beginning farmer and rancher coordinator positions that Congress called for in the 2018 Farm Bill, and we will do our part to ensure that the USDA and SBA improve their outreach and assistance to agriculture entrepreneurs. I would now ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements to the record for some more supporting materials. Without objection, so ordered. And again, thank you all. We have a lot of work to do, and I'm excited to get back home during the district work period in August and continue to hear from folks in my district. And hopefully I might even get to see you, Jason. That would be great. But thank you again for taking your time. And without any further business to come before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.